For many, this heat, dust, and isolation remain the perception of agriculture. However, in the 21st century, agriculture is an exciting, high-tech sector that feeds the world.
Thanks for coming to us. We're sitting here in our house and we've had about 10-15 minutes of chit-chat. I think introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from and just what you do briefly, and then we can carry on from there.
Okay, so my name is Michiel. I run a company called Beekeeping Group. We're based in Port Elizabeth. Originally, I come from Belgium and moved to South Africa 10 years ago. My wife is PE based, so we ended up, well, she was PE based. We lived overseas for a bit, moved back to Port Elizabeth. As a young, flamboyant young man, I thought I'll easily find a job. I mean, how difficult can it be to find a job in Africa? Turned out it was quite difficult. And then a guy came and did a bee removal at the house of my in-laws where we were staying at that time. And I thought, this is quite interesting, and I have nothing better to do with life. So I decided to go and volunteer at the Beekeeper. I volunteered there for a couple of weeks, and the guy said to me, well, do you want to work here? And I thought, like, well, it's better than sitting at home. I might as well earn a bit, and in the meantime, I learn, and this is quite interesting. And within the first couple of weeks, I asked him and said, okay, cool, how do you make money? He was like, well, building boxes, but I have two left hands, so that's not an option for me. I don't really have a gift in hammering or building anything, so that's not going to ever work for me. The second thing, he was making honey, but it was very much like, it's weather dependent. If the rain comes, sometimes, but even if the rain comes, sometimes not. You would place your bees and then you sometimes, and I was like, that sounds very much like a gamble. That doesn't sound like
a lot of sometimes.
Yes, that's right. Like a lot of loose ends, and like I was like, that doesn't sound like you can build a business on that. And he said like pollination, you rent out the bees, and I was like, that sounds like interesting. So the first thing I did was I phoned a company in the Langkloof, but this is now in November. I phoned a company in the Langkloof, and I was like, okay, cool. It was running about 600-700 beehives, I think, and I phoned him, well, not me, but my boss, and I was managing those, and I phoned him and I said, hey guys, I have some house for rent for pollination. You guys interested? And they were like, well, that's really awkward because we finished pollination for the year. It's November and we do pollination half of August till half October. It's all the deciduous fruits, apples, pears, stone fruit. So I was like, all right, good timing. This is not awkward at all. So they're like, yeah, you really know your stuff, obviously, that you're phoning now for pollination. So I was like, great. So then I decided, okay, cool. Well, I asked them, I said, who else needs pollination? They're like, well, the guys of the seed industry, they onions and carrots, they need hives now. So I was like, all right, where are they? It's on. I was like, okay, cool, I'll phone them. So I started phoning around, and how do you find seed farmers? Because there's lots of little ones everywhere. It's not like the big groups. But then I got in contact with one of the seed companies, and I phoned them, and I was like, hey, I'll be based in Port Elizabeth, looking for opportunities to get involved in pollination. The guys were like, oh, just you got sent. We had a beekeeper in Craddock, and he's gone to New Zealand, and we actually need 250 hives. And I said, when do you need them? I said, we need them yesterday. I said, we can deliver tomorrow, and then the day after. And literally, that's how I started. So,
and what year was this?
This was now 2012.
Okay.
So yeah, 10 years.
11 years.
Yeah. So in 2022, that was 10 years ago. We did our first. I did my first pollination. So the guy himself was renting out some hives already in the Langkloof, but we didn't know seed production. He didn't even know that was like a thing. So yeah, we took out 250 hives in the Eastern Cape, and did pollination, and I was like, this is actually quite nice. This is neat. You rent out the beehives, you fetch them, make some money. I was like, this is easy. Turns out it's not that easy, because obviously, the logistics of it all, but it went okay, and we got some good feedback, and then I was like, okay, cool, how do we build on this? And then I had to obviously start upskilling myself and up-educating myself about what is pollination, what do you need, how does it work? And I think for the last 10 years, that's actually what I've done. And I love the combination of bees. So I love bees. If I didn't do bees for work, I'd still have bees as a hobby because they're fantastic. I wouldn't have so many, because harvesting hundreds of hives that's not a joke. Like doing 5 hives in your garden, that's actually quite fun. But they are fantastic. But then that whole like pollinating thing of like, adding value and the whole science and the interest around it. So that's where I've gone the last 10 years with the business. And that's what I enjoy. So I also have some other things in my life. I have 2 children. I have a wife, the South African one. And still based in Port Elizabeth. Great place to live, a bit of an armpit of Africa, I often describe it as. I think Gary Cliff once described it, rightly so. Because there's not a lot happening, and there's not a lot of agri happening, like I think, the big agri is still Western Cape, and there's actually a lot happening up north at the moment, especially in the orchard space. But there are opportunities outside, and I mean, it's only a good drive to Worcester, and, we're here to, connect and build relationships. Sitting next to me is Jaimee, a maverick in the bee industry. But she'll talk about herself and introduce herself.
Okay, so I actually grew up in Kenya, and then I came to South Africa for a bit of high school and then university. So I went to Rhodes and I studied entomology. And then that's how I met Michiel.
And they have an excellent entomology department at Rhodes University. I've been there and interviewed some of the people that studied there, and I was blown away. So good to hear that.
Yeah, so I studied my undergrad in entomology and botany, and then I did my honours in entomology. And I did one of my projects with Michiel. And then after that, I ended up doing an internship for Sakata, which is one of the seed companies. Working for Michiel in PE on breeding bees, because they had identified that as one of the major problems is multiplying swarms and making sure there's enough bees to pollinate all the crops. So I worked on figuring out how to breed bees with African honeybees, because it's a different subspecies that we have here.
You're talking about the Cape bee versus the Eastern Cape.
Yeah. So we worked on that for a year. And then,
excuse me asking, did you cross the 2 types of bees?
No,
I didn't quite understand.
No. So we worked with the African bee, which has laying workers. So
The Cape bee.
the Cape.
We work with the Cape bee, isn't
The
it?
Capensis one.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have Capensis as well in the Eastern Cape. So Capensis is Eastern and Western Cape, but because they have laying workers, it's
The
it's
workers can lay
more
eggs.
tricky to breed with than your European bees, who are, just easy to handle.
Yeah. So I worked on figuring out how to do that without getting the laying workers to come about, because you don't want that. And then from there, I started working on pollinations, like optimizing pollination. So we do research into building a database of information around pollination. So we're not just dropping off hives, but we're actually seeing how we can use the bees to get the best possible yields for the farmers. Because there's very little information on that around, especially in South Africa. We want to try and be more scientific about the way that we do things and not just drop bees and hope for the best.
Yes, it sounds very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense that you would do that. And are there any trends that you've picked up in the data that you can discuss or want to discuss? I mean, or is it a bit early to do that?
Plenty of data to discuss, plenty of trends, but I think, it's obviously very, very crop specific. So we've done quite a bit of research in kiwis specifically, because kiwi was a big crop in the 80s. Lots of guys planted kiwi. I think this is from hearsay and stories, is that like a lot of wrong varieties were planted in the right areas, or right varieties in the wrong areas. But basically it didn't match up. So a lot of guys burned their fingers. They planted kiwi orchards, they went all in, and actually the industry didn't really take off. Where the fault lies, I don't know, it's the 80s, long time ago. But in the last couple of years, kiwis have been a fairly hot product, as in I think there's opportunity, there's new varieties, there's a couple of new companies that also have identified new areas. I think it's a little bit with the blueberries, they can grow them now in a much broader spread of climate. You know, in the old days there was certain small areas you could grow them, but with the breeding they've actually now extended all the areas, and some need less chill units, some need more. So we've actually done quite a bit of work, because obviously kiwis, the challenge there is that the amount of pollination they get determines the size of the fruit. So, you know, that's why they do hand pollinations with pollen guns, and which is quite expensive. And also the bees are under tunnels, under nettings most of the time. There's some kiwis not on nets, but the majority is under nets. So again, that brings its own challenges. So we've actually spent quite a bit of time on doing research. This year, we've actually done the last 2 years, quite a bit of, and then we share it with Kiwis SA. We do presentations to them, we do presentations to other people, work with the kiwi growers. One of the trials we did was spreading the halves out. You get a better, you get better bee activity when you put the halves through the orchards or just on the side. Will they work underneath it? Can you attract them with sugar containers and get them to work further? And so we worked on that trial, and we've actually seen that actually spreading the halves out makes much more sense.
Is this a trial that you initiated yourselves?
Yeah, so we actually in the phase where, you know, with Jaimee coming along. So I met Jaimee.
Okay, sorry.
So basically, I met Jaimee for the first time. So I went to Rhodes University, and I said to Rhodes, I have a great idea. So a great idea is we use bees to apply biocontrol agents to flowering crops, because that's what they do in Europe with bumblebees. You know, Coppert and is it BioBest? Yeah. No. Yes, one of those companies. They do this. And so I was like, okay, cool. You know, if they can do it with bumblebees, you can do it with bees, because what do bees do? Bees move dust particles from a flower to a flower. That's what pollination is. You know, the pollen is a little particle, goes on them. I know they collect it on their wing, on their legs, and they take it to the hive to eat, but there's always some stuck on their body, and that's what pollination is. So if you coat them with something, in theory, they would apply it to the flowers. They're very direct. In Finland, in Belgium, in Holland, they use this on strawberries, they use it in tunnels, they use bumblebees. I think there's a few reasons for that. I think mainly it's easier to control, because there's very few people that can breed bumblebees. Bees is much more open, so it's much harder to control your IP. And I went to the university and I said, I have this great idea. And they were like, oh, this is a great idea. They obviously would say it's a university. And they said, well, but we need a student to actually work on this. So I ended up talking with somebody, professor in the entomology department, and they suggested Jaimee, I think. And I think they said, well, we'll talk with Jaimee and we talk about this project. So how do you make a dispenser that works, that actually can be used in a commercial setting to apply biocontrol agents via bees, using bees as a vector. It's a massive project. So Jaimee did an honors on part of that, and she came up with multiple designs and multiple ideas.
Biocontrol, please define.
So, for example, Jaimee, trichodermis.
So it's like controlling pests or insects, so anything that's harming a plant with a biological substance. So it can be like a fungi or another insect or a bacteria or anything that is beneficial to the plant and will help control the disease or the pest.
So it could be another type of insect, or it could be like a bacteria
like a type of mite
or a fungus. Yeah.
Okay.
And that will get deposited on the flower. And then if one of the harmful things, like thrips, for instance, that eat the flowers, those things will be there.
Yeah. So that's it. So one of the we've tried a few, and one of them competes with for example, botrytis. You know, grey mold. Yeah. When you leave your strawberries long enough in the fridge, they start growing.
Yes. And grapes.
Yeah, most fruits actually. Botrytis is a big problem, and basically what happens is it's a fungi. I think it's a part of the fungi family, and it just grows, you know, and most orchards struggle with it. So we tried a trichoderma, which is a competing fungi, and it actually competes with the botrytis. It just eats the botrytis food, what they live on, quicker than the botrytis, so the botrytis struggles to develop. And then you have other ones that actually eat the botrytis, and like you know, and so there's a whole lot. But we're not a biocontrol company. So,
yes. So this is curious.
Yeah. So So we've used Bavaria bassiana on the bees. We've done metarhiziums on the bees. We've done different products. So we've tested with 4 companies, different products, and we actually put them on the bees because obviously it's very important that the bees don't die. If the bees die, then it's not going to work as your vector.
It's your workers. You can't do this job with dead workers.
That's right, so that's very important, and also that they live afterwards. You don't want them 3 months later to die because that's also not sustainable for the beekeeping industry. So
obviously, because they've got a short lifespan, not to let the hive die if they take the stuff into the hive.
Yes, that's right. So it mustn't kill the larvae, and it mustn't kill the queen, or it mustn't, so that's where, and also like we have a 2-way dispenser. So the bees go out one way and they go in another way. So it's like traffic regulated to some extent, which works over 90%, over 95% of bees will actually follow the right flow. So they get coated in a product and then they fly to the flowers. What the advantages of them is that they're more or less 100% effective. Unlike when you spray a crop, your runoff is basically 99.99%. Like very little actually goes on the flower. And some flowers, like a blueberry, is actually a bell that hangs down. Very difficult to spray in. Like to actually get in the flower is nearly impossible, where obviously bees, all they visit is flowers. They don't go and sit on leaves. They don't go and sit on the ground. They actually go. So if you want to get something on flowers, bees are by far most efficient. A brush is more efficient. You go around as a human, but that's not very...
You have to have a human to operate the brush.
That's right.
The human must be paid.
That's right, which is not very efficient. And even then, like they will probably skip after 2 hours of doing this. You'll start skipping flowers. So bees can work. They work all the time as long as the weather is good. They work, so they're very efficient on weekends. They don't take time off, and they visit flowers every day, all day. That's what they do. So if you have lots of bees, good pollination bees, and they apply the product at the same time, it's a double win, So that was the idea. That was the concept, and it's a nice idea. Most people go, a great idea, but obviously to build the dispenser, I would say it's taken us about 3.5 years to get to a place where, Jaimee had 7 trials at university, and then we have then further reshaped the university project, so we've taken it much further developed. We now have 4 working prototypes built out of wood, which obviously isn't sustainable because it takes a guy like a week to build one, because they have to be built right to the millimeter, and bees are certain sizes. So right now it's actually...
bees don't like working they like working in wood, or to have the hives in wood.
Yeah, but so the hives are wood, and so we actually going to do the dispensers ultimately out of plastics, because if you work out of wood...
but the dispenser... sorry, I'm interrupting. Because my logic telling me if the bee goes through it, he doesn't have to build his nest inside it. So the hive itself will still be wood, but then the dispenser will be something different. Oops. Oh, no worry.
That's not great.
No worry.
Yes, so the bees just go through the dispenser. So it just gets actually fixed on the outside of the hive, and the bees go through it, and then after pollination season, you just take the dispenser away again. Okay. So, they just put it on. So the only thing is so we're busy with a clip-on. So you can actually clip it on the hive and take it off, because you don't want to take it into the field with the dispenser sticking out, because that, for transport purposes,
yes.
That's not really sustainable. And then also, you don't want them actually on if you don't need the beehives to do the applications. That doesn't help as well.
Don't worry, that's all right.
Wow. So that is really quite a concept, that you're actually going to take your bees and get them to go and deliver something beneficial to the crop on their way. Kind of like they're taking it as they're going. They're kind of like a courier or a vector for something that's beneficial for the crop. It's quite an amazing concept.
Yeah, and so in Europe it is actually commercialized with bumblebees. So they use it on strawberries all the time. And so with that in mind, we actually developed a dispenser. We went to the phase where it coats the bees, so they take the product out. So that's something we saw. We actually did it with an inert dye. initially, which was a fluorescent dye. So we put it in there, and then the bees took it out, and then later you could actually go and see it on the flowers, that actually the bees had taken it from the dispenser and actually put it on the flowers. So
That must be incredible to have seen that. You
Yes.
must have been so excited to see that and see it working.
Yes, it took quite a bit of time, so it was quite
Sure.
exciting. After 3.5 years, everything is exciting.
What did you think the first time that he came to you with this idea?
Yeah, I was overwhelmed, but yeah, I've always loved bees, so I was excited to work on that project. And then I quite like building things, like working with my hands. So it was two things I enjoyed doing, and so I was excited to take part in the project. It was quite hard to know like where to start, but I ended up just doing a lot of research and working on what was out there, and then just starting building something. And I did 7 iterations of it, like during my honors. So I just started with something, tried it, then saw how the bees reacted, made changes, and kept doing that over and over. Because yeah, a lot of what you think will work in theory doesn't actually work when you attach it to the hive.
And the cool thing is now you can 3D print something.
Yeah, so that's where we are now. So at the moment, the dispenser, so we've trialed it. We know the product goes on the bees. We know the bees transfer it to the crop. We did a trial on blueberries for botrytis control, specifically in a tunnel at our actually own place, because obviously big scale is quite difficult. It's hard to control. You can't go to a 5-hectare
Yes.
farm and put 4 dispensers, because where did the bees go? Or like which area did they control? So we had to do it like in a small scale. So we did a small tunnel with bees in, and we infected the plants with botrytis. We did a control where we didn't infect them with botrytis. We did a control where we applied with a brush, and we did a control where we sprayed. And we saw that the best management of botrytis was actually the one applied with the brush, which is what bees kind of would do, and the one with bees. The spraying was slightly less efficient, and obviously the one that was a control with no protection, there was heavy botrytis infection on the plants. So then we took the dispenser. So right now, dispenser actually with industrial designer, because you need to come to a place where it becomes, you know, like the concept now needs to actually made into a commercial way, and also you need to look at how can you produce it, how can you multiply the dispensers, because making them out of wood is not sustainable. As great as it is, like the 4 ones we have, you can't make one a week. And because they are so we're looking at 3D printing part of it, and the other parts we're probably going to do mold. Some of the bigger parts we're going to mold. So at the moment, I think the designs are more or less ready, but now we have to decide like how we're going to scale it, you know, because obviously to go from 4 to 3D printing or like molding, you're looking at like doing a couple of hundreds and doing a bigger trial. But we're talking to a few biocontrol companies that are very interested. I think we're going to do this coming season, we're going to do what I describe as commercial trials, you know, like trials that actually are in a
Commercial block.
Yeah, that are like in a hectare, you know, like, or half a hectare, where you can actually go like, okay, this is comparable to a real situation. Because what I have at my place is like a tiny tunnel, you know, so it's easy to control the bees there, and they have no other options than to go to these few plants that are there. So that's where we are now. So, but it's an ongoing project and ongoing research, and the dispensers helped us in a few trials already. So we use it on the kiwis to put a dye, a fluorescent dye in the dispenser, and then at night we go around and see where the fluorescent dye is applied. And you start actually having a bit of an idea, how far do the bees work, you know, because like, do they work 100 meters? And obviously people go like, no, well, we've seen bees the other side of the tunnel, but is that one bee, or is that actually efficient pollination? And like, you know, do you still lots of flowers being visited, or is it just one flower off? Is it just a scout bee that's having a look, or is it actually pollination? So, and then I think some of the challenges is that there's so many different kinds of nets and so many different kind of heights. You know, does it make a difference if a tunnel is 4 meters high? Is it better for the bees to fly, or is it 2 meter fine? Are these blue nets better? Are the white nets better? Are the open nets, you know, like, I think the more open, I think naturally the more better, but on the other guys don't always want to open.
Depending on what kind of wind is available in the area. Also.
Yeah, and I think your diseases, because sometimes they use nets for disease management as well. And then obviously like birds and other pests can get in, you know, if you open up your nest, with blueberries, you might have a flock of birds helping you harvesting your crop very quickly.
And certain crops, like I know that the not nectarines. What's the thing in English again? Narkies.
Oh, mandarins.
Mandarins. That some of them are seedless and some of them are seeded. So if you've got seeded block and a seedless block next to each other, that one needs to be closed off. Otherwise, the seedless ones will have seeds in them.
The bees will sort that out, isn't it?
Yeah.
They will give you some seed.
So then you,
Yes. So it's off topic, but some of these big seedless, easy peeler citrus varieties, they actually plant them and they cover them with net, not so much for all the other environmental protection, but to keep the bees out, to stop them from bringing seeds in with the pollen. So that's also an interesting topic. But I'm fascinated by what you're telling us. So if I understand correctly, and please help me here, your commercial offering that you are wanting to get to is to be able to provide the fruit industry with an opportunity whereby, in addition to pollination, the bees can take these biocontrol chemicals or dust or animals or whatever it is, they can take it with them to the flowers that they're going to pollinate. Is that it?
Well, that's one of the things we do, yeah.
Okay.
So we do other things. That's one of the projects. As that's not a big enough project, we obviously do some other ones. Because we're in Africa, you can't bet on one horse in life.
Yeah.
So one of our basic things we actually do with a lot of growers is actually just basic research. So for example, with the seed industry, we did a research project where it's when it's super hot at times, like crazy hot, 40 degrees plus, but it can also be very cold. So the question is, do you put your house in the shade or do you put them in the sun? And actually no one has the answer at the moment. Everyone will go, well, again, I don't know. People might have the answer, but I haven't found the answer. This is the data, this is what we see. This is actually a beehive observed in the sun versus one in the shade over a whole day during a few weeks.
So you're busy with that research currently?
We've done some trials on that, but we're going to double that up next year. So we kind of believe that every research needs to be done probably over a period of 3 to 5 years. Very hard to go in 1 year and go like, this is it.
No, of course.
This is the fact.
especially with the research.
Exactly. And also, like, you're very dependent on the environmental factors. So, for example, let's say during the day, the bees work very well at lunchtime. That might mean, yes, the bees work very well at lunchtime. This is the ideal temperature. But it also might mean that that's the time the onions are giving off nectar. So, it's not always what you see is what you get. So with bees, it's not like you can't put them in a controlled room and say, okay, everything is the same every year. Because you're looking at environmental factors, like, for example, the moist in the ground can affect the nectar flow in the plant, which then again will affect the activity of the bees on the crops. So there's a lot of things that are a flowering crop over the hill. Like you don't see it, but the bees know that 500 meters over the hill.
The microclimate is different there than here.
There's some ramenas flowering there. There's some beautiful blue gums there. The bees will go and work there, and you go like, "Where are my bees? Why are they not working?" And there's nothing else flowering, but there is. You just can't, So there's a lot of things that, like, I think you need to do trials over a few years. So with the Kiwi guys, we've done 2 years, and we're going into year 3 now.
So what's the results been? Because the previous podcast we put out, we spoke to Kiwi Grow, and I presume that's where you found us from that thing, because the snippet I took out was particularly about pollination, and they said that it's very difficult for them. So what's been the results that you've found so far?
So one of the big trials we did this year at Kiwis where we got really good results was using a bee attractant. So we actually got in the afternoon the bee activity up on the blocks where the bee attractant was applied by 48%, which is a substantial increase. We also recorded in 3 different ways. We do observations on the plants, so a square meter of flowers where we count the bees. We do observations on the beehives in the different blocks, so the ones that were in the blocks with the attractant and the ones versus the ones that were not in the attractant. And then we also do observations on collecting the pollen. So when the pollen come back, where did they bring in more pollen? Because when they bring in more pollen, that means they're working more, the bees are more active. And we saw a clear difference between the areas where the control, where there's nothing applied, versus the area where the bee attractant was applied. We went to see fruit set, and the fruit set data, we actually putting that together at the moment. And in March, they're harvesting. And that's obviously where we'll look at the size of fruit, because that's where the real big differences obviously are. Having said that, not everything is determined by pollination. You know, like if a farmer ran out of water, if the fertigation program wasn't right, you know, like it's not just bees. So we really believe that in the South African industry, there is space to improve that 14 to 3 week period on most farms, to look into the data. And I believe there's a lot more data to be gathered for every specific microclimate and area. I don't think there's a one fits all approach. Like with the kiwi farms, we see that like, you know, with them being over the mountain, they're being cooler, it's the bees work different than in the other ones. And then you have different varieties. You know, you have your different varieties of kiwis, and the bees work different on those ones. So what we saw, like for example, with the bee attractant, that really made a difference. Spreading out the beehives in the orchard made a difference on the beehives. Then we've done a big trial, but the Kiwi guys must contact us if they want to understand it all. We've done, so we talked to, so we actually, looks like we're going to do trials next year for the first time with SA Kiwi. So far we've done it with the growers out of our own initiative as an extra service to improve, but we're talking with SA Kiwi. We do presentations at every SA Kiwi meeting where we discuss what we've learned about pollination. So next year it looks like we're going to probably double up and go to the north of the country, do some trials there, because again, more data points give us more data, and more data gives us more results.
Is there quite a bit of kiwis around close to you at the moment?
Not true.
I know there's some in George.
Yeah, so George and Wobham's Kraal, and then like so, and that part of the garden route, there's a few plantings there. There's a little bit in Langkloof, but there's not huge amounts. I think the Grabo has a few kiwis as well, and then up north, Mokgobuskloof and then KZN, you know, like the highlands there of KZN, because they need a certain cool weather units as well, isn't it? The chill units.
That's really interesting, fascinating.
And then we've worked with like heated halves. We put heating pads in halves. Does that work better? We have like lots of graphs and like, you know, like, so we have data on that.
And with kiwis being, a lot of them being under nets, and you say you're also looking at what could be the magic source there. But I know in blueberries that there's a lot of die-off in the hives, and that hives have got to be swapped around double the amount of time as. So if I've got a friend that does pollination in blueberries, and where you would normally swap every 3 weeks or 4 weeks on apple orchards or stone fruit or whatever, you have to swap every 2 weeks. Otherwise, there's too much stress in the hive and he loses too much bee. So he actually needs double the amount of hives to be as efficient. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes. Like I'll be careful to say, like, am I correct? Like, I think there is a lot of stress on the bees in nets. The kiwi pollination, what's nice is only a 14-day pollination. So they only let their flowers flower for 14 days. They pick everything before and everything afterwards, because with a kiwi, it's ripe and it's ripe. You know, so they harvest the whole tunnel at the same time. They don't. You don't go around with berries. You see
you pick out.
Yeah, with kiwis, I think they actually take them and they measure the
pressures.
Yeah, the pressures and the
sugars.
The sugars and those things. And then like when there's they're ready, they're all ready, and they pick them all at the same time.
Yes.
So it's very different that way. So it's a very short pollination. Blueberries now, with a lot of these varieties, they flower for 3 months plus.
And it's got a couple of varieties in the various blocks inside the net.
Well, yes, and they have these flushes, isn't it? Like they come up and they flower, and then they stop flowering, and then the next variety starts flowering. But then the first variety flowers a second time after you pick it again. So I think a lot of varieties flower about 3-4 times. They have these flushes that come up.
Yeah, it's like a 4-month period that
and you have to manage it. Put the halves in at the rough time, and then when the flush does, you take the halves back out. So it's a very high maintenance pollination period. Very, very. I think you have to follow it up very well, because there's also no point in putting the bees there when the flush dies. When the flush is down, the bees are there, and because they're in nets, the bees will be under a lot of stress because there's no way there's enough food, and it can go quite quick because I think the flushes come up quite quick and go down and stuff. But I do think the blueberry companies, so from what I hear, so I think beekeepers sometimes complain about the bees that suffer, and I think they do suffer, but I do think the blueberry companies are leaning much more into sustainability and in helping the beekeepers with like opening the side nets, opening sometimes over the nets where bird goes, so the bees can go up and down, so they can actually do the orienteering flights. So I think they are trying, but yeah, I think like being on the nets is just challenging for the bees because obviously it's a unnatural environment.
Well, there's a couple of factors that could mitigate that. I'm talking from my limited knowledge. From if a beekeeper's got alternative source of food and he can swap them quicker, he'll have a lot less die-off, and the die-off that does happen will be replaced pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true, but that's right. And sometimes you don't control that, on a great canola year, like all the beekeepers are dancing in the streets, like there's canola and you go from the blueberries to a canola field, which the bees love. They go crazy for 2 weeks and you can, but on a year like last year where like I wasn't probably everywhere, but in some areas the canola was poor. And then there's not much food in some areas, and then where do you take the bees? And I think that's obviously what's hard, bees, the grazing for the bees is not so convenient as for cattle. For cattle, you have a pivot, you water, and, you can give them a few lucerne bells. And with bees, I mean, you can feed them but it's not so easy because it's not so controlled, So I think that's where there's obviously some of the challenges as well. And I think like Western Cape, great, there's a working government here, but they are cutting down a lot of the blue gums, which is a natural source of food for the bees. The reason why they're doing it is for water management, so you can't fault them over doing that. But it does affect the beekeepers because the beekeepers actually use a lot of the blue gums to keep their bees alive the rest of the year. So there are those environmental factors, and obviously droughts. We have had a few wild periods of drought. I mean, I think Oudtshoorn is still in a semi-drought. They've had one full.
And the Eastern Cape still.
Yeah. The Eastern Cape, big time. But I mean, then this year inland it rained more than it's rained for a long time. Yeah. So, but again, certain spots, so you almost have to be as a beekeeper very mobile and move your hives, but that comes at a cost, like moving your hives from like 500 kilometers if you have 1,000 hives. That's like with the fuel prices there are right now, that costs you a lot of money. And pollination prices have gone up, but not up, I believe, like the cost have. So I think for beekeepers it is tough at the moment. And the honey price has gone down this year, which is strange because everything has gone up. Your biggest cost of a beekeeper, I would say, is salaries and fuel. And the fuel has jumped up by 30%, 40% over a year. And honey prices have gone down. And berry growers were under pressure this year because the ports weren't working. So there's, they're going like, hey, we can't pay the bills or we want to spend less. And the beekeeper goes like, but my costs have gone up. So there's definitely a squeeze in the market. But that's the dynamics of economics, isn't it?
That's everywhere.
I think you're absolutely right. It's something that is happening all over the world and things will have to settle at some point. But from listening to what you say, what you're doing is reasonably unique, especially in South Africa. And the fact that you're doing research as the way that you're doing. And you've spoken a lot about the kiwi industry, which is very exciting. But looking where you are now, I would imagine that you are wanting to expand into other industries. And, I mean, has anybody come forward to assist you guys? Where are you now and where are you planning to go?
Yeah, so we run our own beehives. We ran our own beehives. So right now we don't run our own beehives. So all our beehives that we have is actually subcontracted with a partner business. They run the beehives. The guy that runs it, he's amazing at logistics and operations. He loves it, fine-tuning the trucks moving, the beehives, loves that part of the business. And our focus is actually research and development. So we repositioning BTech as a company. The goal was always to do more research and development.
What's your company's name?
BTech Group.
BTech.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So we really going to focus all our effort on developing new technologies and new data within the whole field of agri. All crops. So we actually next year going to do trials in the max. So we are set up to do probably work on about 3 or 4 farms. in the Nelspruit area and a little bit up to Tsenin. We're going to do some trials next year on pack and pears. Pack and pears are known to have challenging fruit sets, pollinations at times. So we're going to do a few trials there with bee attractants, but also just some bee observations in the field. Because I think a lot of it is, and it's understandable, like the farmers, they observe bees, but they observe very much passing by. They don't go and count the bees. They don't go and look at the hives. They don't go and look at the trees. They go like, yeah, there's bees, happy. They're not tracking it. We proposing a few projects with growers and saying like, okay, this is what we want to do. We're going to collect the data, and out of that data, then we will want to come with like conclusion and actually with solutions for some of the more challenging crops, but also just to improve crops like the max, the almonds. Pollination plays a big role in it, and I think it can still be optimized. Like, the almond industry, if you look in California, what they do there, they bring in 2 million beehives all to California just for that one short pollination period. We have some almonds happening, slowly but surely. Again, like how can we, with a new industry, get standard operating procedures to maximize that pollination, and things like that. So we're doing we actually yesterday talked to some guys, so about pack and pears, some blueberries. We're going to try to do some trials. Again, I think there's other guys doing this as well, but like it's always good to do them ourselves. And I think we are quite unique, but I might be proven wrong, that we are the only company that our focus is actually on improving pollination. So our goal is to work with fruit groups, like all fruit growers actually, and all of them, and actually go and say like, okay, how can we during that period optimize what happens? So we actually have other thing we have developed. Another product is a probe that goes in beehives, which can give the grower live updates on a daily update actually at the moment, in the future hopefully live, where the beehive is on a pollination status. So if it's green, it means it's a good hive, it's no problem, or at least that's what our data tells us, what we know. Orange means probably keep an eye on it, but the challenge with that is that sometimes hive dip a bit and they go back up, so that's also like hold your hands off, but have and then red means like there's something wrong, either ants have destroyed the colony, the bees ain't working, there's a problem, you should go and check it. Because one of the hardest things I think is with the bee industry, is like you drop off boxes, and it's not, and I'm not blaming anyone, for example, you drop off beehives, that swarm might move tomorrow. So we've done it with our own hives. We put probes in hives and we think all these bees are great. Within 10 days, 2 of them were no longer on pollination standard. So we put it in a group of 10 hives. That's 20% of the hives that's no longer on pollination standard. They were good when we dropped them, because we checked them, they were good. Within 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, they're no longer. Now, if you're in a blueberry grower, kiwi grower that have bees for 14 days, it's critical to your crop. Onions, 21 days. Within 14 days, day 10, 2 swarms are gone. That means 20% of your bees are no longer working. So, and I'm not saying the farmers then shouldn't pay for that. What we should do is how do we then add the bees? Because for the farmers, the loss of not having the pollination is much greater than not paying the beekeepers. I'm not saying let's put less bees. What I'm saying is let's manage the bees so the bees do a better job. So the guys in onions, he will only have his main flowering probably day 10, like in that second week to the third week. But now day 10, 2 swarms are gone. So now he actually only has 8 swarms. But if you work this out per hectare, a guy that has 10 hectares and he work hybrids, that's 12 hives per hectare. If he's losing 3 swarms per hectare that are no longer working, he's actually losing a massive amount potentially on pollination, which then potentially is actually real money in his pocket that he's losing out on. So the question is, how do we manage that? And so the idea kind of came last year. One of the seed companies said, okay, cool, we're going to go and do inspections in the field. So poor Jaimee had to jump in the car, go all the way to Berrydale, which from us is about a 600 kilometer drive, inspect some hives, go to the Rust, inspect some hives, come back home. That takes 3 days.
Yeah.
You sleep there in the morning,
Yeah,
you
of
do.
course, it's huge.
So
And
the cost.
a lot of times you've got to work at night when the bees don't sting you.
Yeah, so but we did this during the day, and the seed company sent 2 of their people, but just on our side, it cost us 12,000 Rand to do 1 day of 50 beehives inspection, which is insane. Like, that's not a cost that we can take upon ourselves doing pollination. So if we have to go and check all our hives, at some point, we have over 1,000 hives in pollination. It's physically nearly impossible, but also it doesn't make sense, because again, you have a day of pollination of 14 days. You open them up that day, the bees are upset. Half that day they don't work. Now they're all flying around. And so how do you actually know what's happening in the hives? The other thing is you open the bees, now they're upset, the next day they swarm away. So now you actually have been the cause of, from those 50 swarms, to now go like, well, if the opening goes up, we're out of here. So now you lose swarms because of the inspection. So it's completely inefficient. So the only way to do it is actually monitoring the hives, doing pollination, and have some kind of system that reports.
So tell us about the probe. That
Yes,
is
I'm also
very
curious
interesting.
I thought you'd be.
Is it a unique product? Do others like this exist? Is it something new in South Africa? And what is it measuring inside the hive that's telling you, what is the measurement based on?
And the next thing is, somebody's got to make money in the end, because that thing is not free. Who's going to be paying you for that? Is it going to be the grower paying you to put probes into the hives, or is the beekeeper going to be doing it? Because
Your idea on that?
Because now if the grower is paying, and the beekeeper rocks up there, and there you are standing with, I don't know how you put it in, let's say you're drilling a hole inside of his hive to stick a probe in, I think he's going to be upset. So I'm curious.
Yeah, what is your concept?
So we're still working on that, because obviously new product. So in our own hives, so the hives that we work together with, we're going to do it as trials. We're going to do it on commercial trials this year. We're going to do it with probably about 2 or 3 companies going forward. The way we see it is that the growers will pay. So for the beekeepers, why would they pay to get their hives inspected? They're going to go like, well, our hives are good. So for the growers, the benefit is that actually they know what's happening. And with that, they should get better pollination. The way it will have to be put in is it fits in between the frames, and the beekeeper will have to put it in, obviously.
Is it wireless?
Yes. Yeah. So otherwise it's impossible to put on farms, if you would start running cables. Also, it has to be in the hive, because otherwise we know in South Africa these things would have little feet, And
then if it's wireless, there's batteries involved.
Yes.
And batteries have to be charged.
Yes, but they will be fine for the whole pollination period. So they would be fine to run for months.
And the bees will protect the item.
Yes.
So, but also it's very small. So
yes.
And it's basically there's not much value in it. It's obviously we know in South Africa that there's a challenge and stuff.
You wouldn't know it's inside the hive unless you open the hive.
And there is a sensor that takes when people fiddle with the hive. So for the beekeepers, that is actually an advantage. When the hive is on pollination, somebody fiddles with their hive, it can potentially give them a live message saying people are fiddling with your hives. So you could phone the farmer and say, hey, go and check the hives, because there's guys playing with the hives that shouldn't be.
It could be very beneficial for the whole industry.
Again, in my limited knowledge, I would structure this towards the beekeepers, not towards the growers, because it's a selling point for the beekeepers. It's a point on where they could charge the growers more per hive. Say to listen, we'll give you per day, maybe when it's a live system, you'll be on a WhatsApp group with us, or WhatsApp, and if there's an issue, I'll send it through to you immediately, or they couple both of them together, and for that they can charge an extra 50 Rand per week or per day for that service. Plus also, he will know if there's an issue with one of his hives. He'll say, if I do pick up there's an issue, I'll swap out the hive immediately.
Yeah. So the beekeeper is obviously tagged in, but for me, so I know a lot of the guys in head office, on the bigger groups, they actually want to know what happens on the farms. Bees is still the biggest loose cannon in the industry. When they deal with a big chemical company, they know what they're getting. When they work with a fertilizer company, the guys will go this is what's in it, this is how it works, this is how it's proofed, this is the ISO, this is the, the registration. So they can all do that. With bees, it's this is a box. Well,
it looks like it's working.
Yes. So I think the value lies both ways. So I agree for the beekeeper, but I think the value lies really in big time for the growers that have that invest a lot of money in beehives, but also their crop depends a lot on it. For a company to pay extra to actually know that the bees are working, I think that's a no-brainer. If you know that the bees on your farm are all working, so that's why we see the model. I'll take it on board, what you say. So I think it is a both way. But what I find difficult with beekeepers is that there's a lot of smaller beekeepers, and to start dealing with every small beekeeper and you want 12, actually the easiest if a big company goes we bring in 2,000 hives, every beekeeper that's going to work with us will get their hives monitored because we want to know what's happening on the farms. You don't bring hives unless they're monitored. These are the monitoring devices. You will put them in. If you don't do it, don't work with us. We pay you this money. The beauty of it is you might have to swap your hives less because the hives are doing well. You might have to swap them more. So the moment your bees are not doing so well, you actually also know it yourself. And there's a tampering device that whenever something goes wrong, you actually know as well. So that's so I see it for me, I've spoken to some of the agri groups and they're all going we would love to know what happens in the beehives because right now we don't know. And people talk about a bee inspector. And I think we've been talking for the last 20 years about bee inspectors in the bee community, but no one wants their hives to be opened, which I understand. If guys open up hives, what are they doing? And plus, how do you judge a hive versus another hive?
And also, what does he bring from the previous hive to this one?
That's right. And now he's opened 20 hives, and now he has AFB spores on, and now, so a beekeeper should probably look after their own hives. That's actually a very good idea. But at the same time, I understand the growers saying okay, what's happening? And I think this device will potentially solve that problem between everyone. And I think for some crops that 10%, knowing that 10% extra pollination will be there because you don't have bad hives, will well pay for whatever the charge is to monitor it for them. So that's why I see instead of putting the cost on the beekeeper, actually adding it as a value to ultimately the crop. Because I believe better pollination will return that 10% extra to the growers. Obviously, the growers have to buy into it, but so far, most people are quite positive.
And in terms of cost, what are you looking at per unit?
Still working on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do, again, commercial trial this year. We're doing kind of a cost share with some guys and say okay, this is what the cost is of the trial. Are you willing to pay that? With that data then, and with whatever we learn, we then can actually price it right to the market and see where we can position it. So right now we don't know exactly. It's quite difficult because tech is not cheap. But at the same time, you also can't go and be it can be more than the pollination because then why do it, But it will definitely be cheaper than doing physical inspections. And it will actually give a daily update about all the hives on all farms, which is a massive improvement for whoever is in charge of pollinations. If you bring in some of these groups, bring in a couple of thousand hives a year.
That's fascinating.
They don't know. They try their best, and I understand the fieldsmen go out and they look at the hives. Some of them are allergic to the bees. They sit in their buckies and they look to the window. Yeah. And it's not always the beekeeper. And that's what I keep saying. Bees swim away. Ants in the Karoo. It's a different level. Those ants there, yes, they're they're insane. They overrun beehives. Within a few days, they'll clean out the whole beehive. And as a beekeeper, what are you supposed to do? The guys go well, go and put ant poison. But how many times are you going to drive and still keep your pollination viable? Because a trip costs a couple of thousand rand. So how many times can you really drive to Prince Albert to go to 25 beehives and put ant poison around it or spray poison? And so, and then the farmer says he's going to do it, but is he doing it? Yeah. Which this will again help. It will report. So that's a very practical, potentially very practical changing device that will help pollination.
On the beekeeper side as well, let's say he's not pollinating and his hives are standing in a blue gum forest somewhere on somebody's farm where he stores them for the rest of the year, he will also know what's happening in them.
Yeah.
Because if somebody goes and vandalizes it, he'll get an immediate update and he'll know there's problems. Or if a badger comes in or if ants come in, he'll know about it. It's not like he's going to come back there after a month or two and see that half his hives have been broken.
I think the challenge there is that for most beekeepers, that will not be worth the cost, because the device, like, to have it in and to set it up it will cost. So
Yes.
in pollination, it adds enough value, I believe, to growers. Like for a beekeeper, I think most beekeepers are ticking over, but I don't think there's many beekeepers that are going like, cool, we have so much extra, and the benefit for them. Like, so it would be great, but I don't know if it will commercially make sense for them. But that's what beekeepers must figure out for themselves. So that's.
I think it will. I think there will be a lot of interest in it. If they can afford it, it's up to them. But I think the ones that will be able to afford it, and I think there's many of them, will definitely come on board with the tech for sure. Because I know from speaking with my friend that he's arrived at a place, or I've been with him, and then he'll get a phone call from the people where it stands, where his hives are standing. No, there was a badger that came in and threw up, and now he can't go today or he can't go tomorrow, and it ends up being a week before he gets there. So if he can get a almost live update that there's a problem, he can sort it out a lot quicker. Because often where these things are standing, the farmer don't even go there once a week.
But there are tempering devices that on the market right now that are cheaper. So they will not give you any of the data of the status of your hives. So tempering devices you can probably get cheaper than us. So if people want to find tempering devices, I think you can get them. You definitely can get them cheaper. So I'm not promoting myself. I'm just being honest. Like if a beekeeper is looking for a tempering device, we're not the guys. We're actually the guys that want to be in that pollination space. So guys can use it for that, but I don't think it will be cost efficient. So because again, they don't need daily updates on their hives. That's actually not beneficial. Most beekeepers will know what the bees are doing in certain areas. And for me, knowing beekeeping, you have to keep your costs down. So a tempering device that only sends you a signal when there's something playing with your hives will be much cheaper than something gives you daily updates. You don't need daily updates. Like I wouldn't if I was so in my hives I wouldn't do it unless for the pollination periods where actually guys benefit from the status of the hives and they actually want to know the status of the hives. And right now that's a loose cannon in the industry.
Fascinating.
So, BTech. Very exciting, the things that you're doing. Very innovative. Is BTech just you? Do you have affiliations still with Rhodes University? Do you have affiliations with any other official? Are you affiliated to any kind of government research industries? Where are you hoping to position yourselves?
We're hoping to really position ourselves within the private sector. Because the private sector tends to move quick. They actually make decisions, like they want decisions now, which is what I like. We're quite small, so we can be flexible, we can think on our feet, we can make decisions. Still busy with some of the dispenser with the university. We did a small trial with them last year, but academic world often moves on academic pace, unfortunately, in my experience. We're very open to work together with other people within the space. With the dispenser, we work together with other companies. We don't want to be a biocontrol producer. We don't want to make our own products. We don't want to go to the market with our own products. We actually want to partner with people that go like, these are the products. This is the way of applying it, and together we go to the market. So the same with the research. We work with the kiwi growers. We actually we paid for it so far ourselves always. And then we share it actually at the moment with South African kiwis at some of their national conferences where we present it to everyone. But obviously, if people pay for it, they might say like, well, we want. That's also fine. So we're very open to work together with different people. But ultimately, I believe there's an opportunity to improve pollination. That's where we want to be. So we want to work with the right industry partners. So that's one of the reasons why we're actually coming to this area of the world, because there's a lot more deciduous fruit. There's a lot more berries. There's a lot more people doing stuff in the industry, and that's actually where we want to be. Connect with the right people. Then hopefully they can guide us and we can work together and build actually data in different areas on different crops and actually become a knowledge center for pollination within the South African context.
What's the most interesting thing that you guys have learned from a bee that nobody knows? That you were like, wow, this is something.
That nobody knows.
I thought for the kiwis, the placement of the hives, I thought that was very interesting because everyone just places them on the side of the orchard. And then with using the colored dye, we saw that the bees aren't working they're mainly working within a 50-meter radius of the hive. So by placing the hives all 50 meters from each other, you can get like much better coverage of your orchard instead of literally just placing them on the edges and having them work, 50 meters from there. So I thought that was really interesting because I think it's wild that everyone's just going and dumping the hives out and you don't have any information of where those bees are actually working. So by doing that, we were able to get like much better coverage for the pollination. So.
And have you done fruit where cross-pollination is needed? Have you done the same thing with dye to see if they are actually going from a peckham to a forel that's in the same orchard?
So that's an interesting topic to talk about now. We actually had a discussion yesterday with Gas. So people place bee hives according to the rows, and they say bees work on the row. I don't know where that factually comes from. So we actually suggested to the guys yesterday, like, well, are we sure that bees work on the row? And are we sure they don't cross over? Because if they work the row, why plant 2 rows of forel and 2 rows of peckham if they're going to work the forels and the next day they're going to work the peckhams? Then you must plant every second in the same row. So yes. Those are things, but this is it. And it's no offense to anyone. People might take offense that people do. But there's a lot of old wife tales. So, and this is where I want to go and be like, okay, cool. Let's do the basic trial. Let's go back. Let's place hives in different areas and actually go and see if you place the hives in the middle, will the bees all go and work on one side? Will they work on between both? Will they actually cross over? So that's what would be interesting to build a very simple data like that. That's what I'd love to do, is build the basic blocks, and then later you can work, in harvesting pollen and moving the pollen from one side of the orchard to another side and coating the bees in pollen, and you can go much deeper and much further in it. But right now I think a lot of that basic research factually doesn't exist. I think it exists because people have always done it a certain way, and we do it this way because we've done it, and it might be right, and people might be going this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and that's fine. But I would love to see the science on it. I would love to see the paper that goes do you know what? The reason why bees work on the rows because we've done these 12 tests, and we actually see that they consistently do in different. I'm in. If you can show me the research, I'm in. But if you go oh no, we've always done it that way, I'm I've seen too many things where we've always done it that way. That means very little.
What they say that's the most dangerous thing you can hear from someone when they say, but we've always done it this way.
100%. So that's a very interesting one you bring up, because that's exactly what we talked about yesterday. And I said okay, cool, can we run a trial? Let us design a few trials. Do them in the orchards. I mean, the bees are there for pollination anyway, so all we need is some observations in the field and set it up in the right way, and let's see do the bees do this, or is this because I know in Max it's a big thing, your Bowman's versus your 316s, 314s, do the cross pollination is better for the Max. But how do you structure that in the layout? Because it's not very handy.
Are they cross-pollinated?
Yeah, and also and if they are, and if they're not, how do you make it happen? Because every second tree is not so easy to harvest when they have to harvest them at different times, because the guys knock the trees, they only knock every. So that's not very practical. So now that's why they do different rows. So I get it, but the question is still, does it work? Because if you're doing it and it makes no difference, and let's not do it. You're wasting time. So it'd be very interesting just to do those basic trials. And that's actually where we want to start. So a lot of things we've talked today is next level and the complicated stuff. But I think that within industry, a while back, I sat back with a grower, and they've been doing pests for donkey years. And the grower said, I said, so, do you sometimes struggle with pollination? Yeah, we actually struggle every so many years. We actually have problems with a certain pear variety. And I was cool, what trials have you done on pollination? They're none. And I was but hold on. How why is the data not being collected? Like every year, do a few trials and start putting it together. Like it doesn't, it's not.
So no one asks the bees.
Well, no one asks the questions. Like people ask the questions, but we don't go look for solutions. And I really think like for the volume of that variety of pear or that variety of apple, it's worth doing the test. Like, you know, like surely if you get it right, like you really win.
Yes.
So that's actually, I think, where like part of us where we want to be. It's like do those basic, very simple trials and go and do them and go like, yes, it's true. They do work according to the rows, but that does mean that all orchards layouts where you plant 2 rows of this and 2 rows of this make no difference. So let's just stop it. Let's start planting the orchards different. If we can't do it, let's not worry about cross-pollination because it's not happening anyway. I think those would be great trials. Very basic.
A good place to approach that is also with the fruit breeders or with IP control companies that's got to sell the particular cultivars to the growers. Because, again, talking my limited knowledge, is that instead of them selling, let's say it's a 1 hectare block and there would have been 2,000 trees in there, only be able to sell 1,000 trees of a particular cultivar. If, let's say, that is not the case, that they do not need cross-pollination, they can sell 2,000 trees.
Yeah.
So that might also be a good avenue to look at, go to these guys and say, can we trial this with you? Because they've got trial blocks all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's right. So if you know the ins, let me know. Because it's all about knowing the people, isn't it? Like, I mean, in the industry, farming is still very personal and people want to, you know, meet you and you need to have the conversations and it's building a network of people to work with. And so that's something where we still are, baby steps. So we've actually always focused on our side of the world because we were running our own bees. So we always worked in so with the kiwis, we did trials to improve our own pollination. Now we kind of stepped away from that. I mean, we still run the bees and we're still looking to grow that part of the business, but we have no ambition in the next couple of years to put our own hives in Ceres. Very happy to work with other beekeepers and actually with growers that want to improve their pollination and gather the data, and then we can apply it over the rest of the country. So we're shifting a bit, and that's why, you know, it's about building those contacts. But I agree.
And the IP companies, they're breeding so many new cultivars that they will have, instead of just a 2-week flowering on pears, they can keep beekeepers busy for 6 weeks because it will be 2-week intervals on the different cultivars. Just thinking aloud.
Yeah. No, that's true. Like, so I think that's it. Like, there is a lot of opportunity to, to still expand in the space that I think we are. There's a lot of opportunity to do research.
We've got a tradition where we let the previous people that we interviewed ask a question for the people we're interviewing now.
Okay, cool.
And they didn't give us it on the day, and they've sent the question now.
Okay, cool.
But they sent the voice notes.
Oh, so you have to go and listen to the voice note.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
who are the so is it the?
No, it's. I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay, cool. That's fine.
But it doesn't get put out in sequence as we record them. Not yet in this stage. So it could have been anybody, but yours might be going out in 3 weeks' time, and we have 3 people in between. So the last guy before yours wasn't the one that asked your question. We might have interviewed him afterwards.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. So it's cool. It takes you down avenues that you never thought was possible.
Yeah. Obviously, that's very interesting.
Yes. No, it's this whole bee thing is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. I think
and sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of people, especially the public, they've got this idea about bees, that save the bees. Yes, they must be saved, but also they've got no idea what the bee industry is about. They don't know how it works.
No.
What is involved, how the bees.
When I usually go to a braai, people go like, "Oh, cool! Can you give me a bottle of honey?" You know what I mean? Like when you do bees, like when you say like, "Oh yeah, we do bees or work in the bee space." Ah, cool! Can you give me local honey? That'd be great. And you'd be like, "Well, no, not really. No, that's not really what we do." So that's generally like
you can if you want to, but it's,
but not where we focus at all. So that's definitely true. Like I think people don't understand the intricacies of the bee industry and actually where the value, where the real where the real importance lies of bees, not the value alone, but actually the real importance is actually in adding value to crops. There's a lot of crops that wouldn't exist without bees, because there's very little other insects. I mean, a lot of other insects pollinate, and all these solitary bees, and I think we need to all look after those, and there's over 1,000 species just in South Africa alone. But they're just not manageable, not on scale that you can manage bees. So that's why we are stuck with bees for a while,
And I think most people get the gist of it, but they don't get the actual working parts of what is involved with it.
No, but I think, it's a bit with everything, isn't it? Like, I think quite a few people think that milk,
Yes.
Is in a
Comes in a
bottling
bottle.
machine, and you bottle, and it's, they don't understand that, like,
Yes.
there's a whole process behind, like, almond
if you
milk.
don't-
Where does that one come from? Just from the almond cow.
From bees.
Well, that's right,
It comes from bees.
So that's right. So, like, I think people don't understand the intricacies and the complexity of agriculture. Like an apple. I don't think people understand the amount of work that goes. I mean, yesterday we had at a pack house, and the amount of people that are there looking at different pears or like different, stone fruits, and like the amount of work that actually goes in it before an apple is in your fridge. Like before you have it in your hand, that thing is gone. It's crazy. It's like, for me, that's one of the things that I find incredible. It's like, for example, the seed industry. When I learned about why they grow the seed here, and then where the seed goes from here, and then where the onion seed gets planted in other parts of the world, and then it goes from there to, all the shops, and in every part of the world they have different varieties, and they like different shapes of onions and different colors. Some like pink, some like red, some like the white onions, that like which variety, and like it's mind blowing. Like, to me, it's absolutely mind blowing that an onion, there's such a huge machine behind it to get an onion on your plate, and you go like, oh, an onion costs you.
And you often don't even see it in your food.
No, 100%.
And so, are we getting to
I've
explained to them the.
Okay, so we've got our question, and our question is part of, as Dewald explained, it's a tradition from the previous person that we interviewed, and they just sent the question now, which is what I want to listen to now. So the question is for you, and both of you can answer it if you like. It's open to either.
Or each can answer their own.
Is in your career and your work life, what has taught you the most valuable lesson, and what circumstance, like the most valuable lesson in your career? What has it been, and what has it meant to you? It's nice and broad, so you can.
That is very broad. I'll start. You can have a think. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know the most valuable, because I think that's very difficult to define a moment. I think one of the moments was earlier in this year. I sat down together with some guys in Belgium. So I'm now 42. So I'm a very slow learner. See, at 42, I'm learning one of the most valuable lessons in my life. And I wish I learned this one earlier. So what I realized was I went to Belgium. I'm Belgian, so I went home to see family, and I went to see some VCs, because we're talking about, how do you scale the business, and but they're quite different. They're very much like on a personal level, and they were like, and we actually ended up having a whole conversation. They said, like, the most important thing in your business is that you find the purpose of yourself and find the purpose of your business. I think so often in South Africa, we are stuck in making money and survival. And luckily, I can be in a place where I can look at self-actualization. I know a lot of people can't. And it's not a diss at them. Like, we have to survive. You have to have food for your kids first. But for me, going like that, actually today was a part in my business. So I actually ran my own bees. And deep down, I really didn't like it, but I never really realized it, like the logistics of it, the moving the hives, the checking up, the keeping everyone happy, and like, so that whole bit caused me so much stress and anxiety that actually I was like, I don't like actually what I do anymore. And actually coming to a place where going like, okay, cool, how about we ring fence this? We find somebody that their purpose, what they do, they like this. This is how they express it. In my mind, no one would like this. But there are people that like the fine-tuning and the operations. And so having done that and actually focusing on what I'm good at, what I enjoy, what actually makes me thrive and what actually makes me, like a lot of what I do now work-wise doesn't feel like work. I come home and I'm like, tomorrow I'm ready for it. People will go like literally people go like, on a Wednesday they go like nearly Friday. And in some way, and I understand it, but that's actually a sad way to live. We don't want to live go like Monday and be like 5 days and it's weekend again. Okay, I get it. And at times we all have it, but it can't be all the time that way. So for me, actually focusing on what I enjoy and actually what gives me energy and gives me life has actually really transformed the last 2 months. And I feel like I'm in a much better place. And also shaping the business to a place where I believe that we can add value in that very specific niche area. I think desperation has often driven me to do more, to go like, I'll do this and I'll do this because I can make some money and I can make some, and this is an opportunity. And actually going like, no, we're going to do less. We're going to focus on this thing and actually try to do this well. And hopefully that will grow. And that's probably one of the most important lessons that I've learned that I still remember.
Incredible. And it's so personal and it's so universal to all of us, actually.
There we
For
go.
us to realize what drives you, know your why. Why do you do it?
Yes, which is Simon Sinek, which is actually one of the most watched talks, and the reason is because that people are looking for purpose and a why, and so the whole thing of also building a company. So at some point I hired a logistics guy, but he wasn't a logistics guy. He was just a guy that said he was doing logistics and wanted the job. And that doesn't work. You actually want to have the right people in the right place is what makes work enjoyable. Sure. And so the way I see the company grow is to hire the right people, but I want the right people to come on board and then work with their set of skills rather than say well, this is what we do and you have to fit in here. Sure, you want people to fit in within the vision and the direction, but if people lean more towards, then let's explore that. Let's bring what you bring to the table of the company. That's where I want to go as a company. I want to build a company that's about people, that's actually focused on seeing people develop who they are, where they want to be, rather than go okay, this is where we want to go as a company and we're going there no matter what. That's the goal. But you do this interview again with me in 3 years and that might shift because the reality is that things shift and develop. But I hope I hold on to that in some way.
I would say through beekeeping, what I've learned is just to stay calm, because when I started beekeeping, working with large numbers of very angry hives is quite overwhelming at times. And the worst thing you can do is panic, because a bee stings you and you start getting all stressed out and you rush things, make mistakes. It's a recipe for disaster. But then translating that into work, just never panicking, because I really struggle with change of plans, and with beekeeping and working with people that are different to myself, that happens a lot. You can't plan for everything. So learning to rather not panic and start thinking, what am I going to do now? Everything's a mess. Rather just sitting, restructuring, staying calm, thinking, what am I going to do next? How can we still make this work? I would say that would be the biggest lesson I've learned.
But I think working with bees, you need to be pretty brave, actually. Yeah. Not many people would do that. So the fact is that you do that and you manage to stay calm is pretty cool.
Yeah. I think once you've been stung a few hundred times, you get pretty used to it. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Great. I think we can...
Yes, I think we can.
Is there anything, as a parting comment, is there anything else you'd like to add? Think about the people that are listening. We've had a fascinating chat. If you'd like to finish off.
I'd like to finish off by saying thank you. Thank you for having us and creating a space to have a conversation.
Thanks for contacting us.
Yes,
yeah. And
it's
if
been a pleasure.
anyone listens to the podcast and goes be interesting to be in contact, to discuss, and there might be no synchronization whatsoever, but I always think that having conversations and networking is useful, and there can be ideas, there can be things that develop out of it. So, that's where we'd like to be, and that's where we want to go forward as well.
I always say that doesn't matter where you go, I go with two things in mind. even if you go to the shop, you never know who you're going to meet, and you never know who's going to see your product, or in this case, listen to it. That might mean something to you later on. You just never know until you're there.
Exactly.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a lot.